I think the Beatles might be the ultimate example of a band that knew how to use a musical mistake or a happy accident. There are many examples in their catalog, but I decided to go with something a little bit more obscure, if there is such a thing as an obscure song in the Beatles catalog. Long, Long, Long from the White Album, one of my favorite George Harrison tracks of all time. I've always found this track to be achingly beautiful, and it's recorded so quietly. George practically whispers the lyrics, and the effect is heightened by the sequencing. This track follows the raucous Helter Skelter on the third side of the White Album. There's no way that wasn't a conscious decision by the band, that sequencing there. At any rate, this song is actually kind of a twofer in the realm of happy musical accidents. Let me discuss the first one briefly. In the little acoustic guitar intro, I believe George is capoed on the third fret, and we get this cool little riff. The verse commences. Okay, now let's listen to the Beatles version. You will hear a distinct buzzing on George's acoustic guitar. Check it out. Did you hear that right at the end? Bow, bow. It's kind of crazy. By the way, you can hear the same kind of fret buzz on Paul's tune, Mother Nature's Son, from the same album. Let's listen to that. On that one, it's most noticeable on the first couple of notes. So what exactly was going on here? Well, all you guitar players will know that if a guitar isn't set up properly, maybe the strings are not high enough off the fretboard, maybe the truss rod isn't adjusted correctly. You get this effect sometimes. You play certain notes on certain frets and the string rattles against the fret and produces that kind of weird buzz. It almost sounds like a sitar, and maybe that's why they liked it so much. God knows George in particular was very smitten with Indian music around this time. Bottom line, I'm so glad they left it in. Other artists who were obsessed with the pursuit of sterile perfection might have said, oh, we got to get rid of that, grab another guitar. No, they left it in, and I think it adds character to these songs, so much so that they used it not once but twice. The second happy accident in this song occurs right at the very end. McCartney hits a sustained chord on the Hammond organ, and it so happened that sitting on top of the organ's Leslie speaker cabinet was a bottle of Blue Nun wine, white apparently. I think it's incredible that we have this level of detail about this. And as the chord built in intensity, the speaker cabinet was vibrating, the wine bottle began to shake and eventually audibly rattled against the speaker cabinet. And of course, being the Beatles, they didn't just discard the wine bottle and try for another cleaner take. Instead, they fully leaned into it. Engineer Chris Thomas actually mic'd up the wine bottle to better pick up the rattling sound, and other effects were added. Ringo did a nice little snare drum roll. Apparently, Ken Scott scraped a microphone against the strings of the acoustic guitar, and the whole thing is capped off by a ghostly wail from George Harrison. It's truly chilling. In fact, when I was a little kid, it used to scare the hell out of me. this happy musical accident really doesn't have anything to do with the performance of the song. I'm not talking about a missed note or a missed cue or anything like that. This took place during the final mixdown of the track. Now, the part in question comes sort of near the end. The band stops and we get Robert Plant a cappella wailing his heart out way down inside. Let's listen to it. Sounds so incredible. And what I'm referring to, of course, is that weird ghostly vocal that's kind of an echo, but not really an echo, because sometimes the quiet voice precedes what Robert is going to say in the main vocal. Other times it seems to follow. One thing I can tell you, though, this was absolutely not planned. And again, to be accurate, this is not an echo at all. Here's how it went down. During the final mixdown, Jimmy Page, the producer and of course guitarist of Led Zeppelin, was sitting alongside Eddie Kramer, the engineer, at the mixing console. And during the playback, it came to that a cappella part and the ghostly vocal appeared. Neither one of them at first knew what the hell was going on. The Led Zeppelin 2 album was recorded on 8 tracks, pretty standard for those days. And according to Kramer, Plant's final vocal was on track 7, whereas track 6 contained what we would call a scratch vocal, a guide vocal, or just a discarded vocal take that was not deemed good enough, which is pretty crazy because from what we can hear of it, it sounds incredible. It sounds to me just as good as the one they actually used. Now, there are other interviews where Kramer says the tracks in question are actually 8 and 7, but it doesn't really matter. The principle is the same. So what they were hearing then was track 6 bleeding through into the final mix, and they couldn't have gotten rid of it even if they wanted to, but of course they didn't want to. Both Page and Kramer immediately realized the potential of this. As you'll hear, we're going to check out a clip from Rick Beato's great interview with Eddie Kramer in which he describes the incident.
It was a freaking accident. So we're mixing away. All of a sudden, I'm hearing this other voice. Woman! And then there's this other woman. If you look at the 8-track, the lead vocal was on 7, and this was another performance.
But did a second performance.
Yes, but the pots, these horrible potentiometers, I had it cranked all the way off, but
it still bled through.
It bled through.
Oh my God.
And Jimmy and I, we look at each other, and we both grabbed the bloody send to the reverb knob at exactly the same time, because we knew instinctively what we want to do is it's breaking through, crank the reverb. That's why you hear that.
It's so amazing that Beato has gotten and continues to get interviews with these legends. We've lost so many from that era recently, and sadly will continue to lose more. It's great that these stories are being documented. At any rate, I was just now trying to picture that part of Whole Lotta Love without that incredible ghost vocal floating in and out. And it's hard to wrap my head around it. The impact of the song would be lessened so much without it. All right, so this one's going to be short and sweet, but I think it's kind of a fun one. As far as I can tell, Sweet Home Alabama is flawlessly performed. I certainly don't hear any musical mistakes that I can recall. But the little happy accident I want to mention comes right at the beginning. It comes from vocalist Ronnie Van Zant and the famous line, "Turn it up," which we hear just as things are starting to kick into gear.
1, 2, 3.
Turn it up.
So cool. By the way, I love the fact that they also included the count-in the very beginning. That's from guitarist Ed King, who, just by the way, plays some ripping guitar solos in this one. Now, that's not too unusual. Obviously, there are plenty of songs that include count-ins. But I think in this case, the count-in combined with the Turn It Up from Van Zandt just really gives the intro such an organic feel. But here's the interesting thing about this one, and I'd love to hear if some of you maybe interpreted this the same way. Until very recently, I assumed that the Turn It Up was sort of a contrived thing, like it was supposed to be Ronnie speaking to us, the listeners, urging us to crank up the radio or the stereo or whatever we happen to be listening on. But apparently it was actually Ronnie speaking to the record's producer, Al Cooper, and/or engineer, Rodney Mills, asking them to turn up the sound in his headphones as he prepared for the vocal take. So those three simple words have absolutely taken on a double meaning over the years. And it must be said, whatever Ronnie's original intention was, countless folks have reached for that volume knob whenever they heard the opening strains of Sweet Home Alabama. Nirvana's cover of the old David Bowie track, The Man Who Sold the World, is the first live track I've included in one of my musical mistakes / happy accidents videos. Now, it should be noted that most of the albums that are called live are not really very live. There's generally tons of doctoring and re-recording going on. Oftentimes, these live albums amount to a studio album with an audience track dubbed over the top. But Nirvana's MTV Unplugged in New York is a very notable exception. This is very much a warts and all performance. Cobain is pitchy as hell throughout the whole thing. There's unwanted feedback.
Who knows? Now, babe, I never lost control.
There was some of the feedback in question. Did you hear that high-pitched squeal in the background? But the subject of this video is Cobain's guitar solo, which is actually kind of cool, quite simple, but contains a couple of questionable notes. Cobain's solo is played on an old Martin D18E acoustic guitar. This is an unplugged performance after all. But the guitar was equipped with D'Armond pickups, and Cobain played the solo through a Boss DS2 distortion pedal. I know that pedal well. I've used it many times myself. And this gives the solo almost the sound of an electric guitar. There's a sustain that you would never get on an unplugged acoustic guitar. Now, Kurt's little flub happens right near the beginning of the solo. You're going to hear him slide up to a note, but he misses. He falls 1 fret short, and then he goes 2 frets up from there. That's 1 too high, and then finally settles down a half step into the correct note. Did you hear it? And the great thing about this one being a live performance is you can also see it all go down. You could literally see his hand on the fretboard. Now, like many Nirvana recordings, the band are tuned down a half step here. So the basic progression in this tune is A to D minor. Being that they're tuned down, it's actually A flat and D flat. But in these cases, I always just call this stuff out as if we were in standard tuning. So again, A, D minor. Now the solo starts on an A note, and he's attempting to slide up to E. That would be the 5th of A. A very strong note within the key and a logical resting point. So that's, I think, what he was going for. And it goes very well. But instead, we get... Now that first note is E flat. That's the flatted 5th of A. Not a note you would expect, especially over an A major, maybe an A minor. Then, when he moves up a whole step, It's the augmented fifth, also known as the flatted sixth. Again, not really a note we associate with major. And then finally, he settles into the correct note. In a way, it all sounds very hip and out. And it's also a really good example of grace under pressure from Kurt. I always tell my students this. If you hit a note that you didn't intend to hit, don't make that scared face, because as soon as people hear a note that's questionable at all, they look to you. That sounded weird. Did he mean to do that? So there's a couple of options. Either smile, or in Kurt's case, just put your head down and keep rolling. No big deal. So that wraps this one. Thanks as always to those of you who hung out to the end. The usual reminders, financial contributions are very much appreciated. Look to the description of the video for ways that you can do that, and you can do that in any amount. Also, remember, if you have a subject that you would like to see covered in one of my videos, drop me an email. You can go to mjerant.com, send me an email, and we can discuss what subject you'd like to see. And for a very, very small fee, I'll do a video for you. So that's about it, I think. See you next time.